Jack's RPG Podcast. I'm in Max. Pursuing the RPG hobby with reckless abandon.
Why, hello, and welcome to Season 23, Episode 13 of the Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
My name is Kimmy.
I'm Mills.
I'm Jason.
No.
I did it.
And we have a super special remote guest.
Who's very patient.
Yay!
Who is, yes. Who are you and what do you do that makes you famous?
Hi, my name is Jason. I am the principal organizer of the Gauntlet gaming community. That's me.
Woo.
And what is the Gauntlet gaming community?
So the Gauntlet is the Gauntlet is so much. There's a lot to the Gauntlet. So we are a podcast network. We have several podcasts of our own. We produce a magazine every month called Codex. We have Gauntlet Con. The sort of crown jewel of the Gauntlet is Gauntlet Hangouts, which is what my t-shirt is today. Gauntlet Hangouts is our monthly gaming calendar. And we're just a great big community of people. Hundreds of people who are really into indie and sort of alternative scene role-playing games. And we play a lot of games. We create together. We play together. We hang out. It's awesome.
Yeah. And quite a few of us are members of the Gauntlet community.
Can confirm.
Yes.
Yes.
It's like a super awesome place to hang out. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's fun.
The term I use when describing it to friends is the aggressive inclusivity, which is just something that I really cherish about that place. And that's awesome.
Yeah. Jason,
The funny thing is, like, we're pretty low key about like we're aggressively inclusive, but like I think we don't make a huge deal about it.
No,
It's
you're
just
right.
what we
Yeah,
are, and it's what we do.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of we're nice and chill about our diversity or inclusivity. So.
maybe a better term is like unapologetic inclusivity,
Unapologetic,
I like that.
Absolutely.
which is
Anybody who pays attention to the Gauntlet Twitter feed knows that. So.
I'm so here for that fucking Twitter feed, man.
Yeah. Our Twitter feed is fine off. It's very awesome.
Yeah.
So,
I think like once a day I get the like fucking right as I just like walk through and like clock something
Yeah.
on the Twitter feed. Like, oh.
I think sometimes some of the community members wish I wasn't so hot all the time on Twitter, but that's okay. I think you have to stand out sometimes on a platform like Twitter.
there's only one temperature.
yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Jason, we're still having a little bit of trouble hearing you, so if you could just make sure you're like close to your mic and as loud as you can be. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
But
it's okay.
you're coming through. It still works.
You don't even need a pop filter. Just get in that mic.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll do my best. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a little tinny and a little quiet, but everybody can hear you.
Okay.
So I mean, like I'm kind of like the new girl to the Gauntlet, and it's super exciting to be on there. I haven't played any games yet, but I've like been told like how amazing the community is, and there's just so many of us who are members there that I trust. Like Mills here, I can't call you Jason because there's another Jason, and like Tomes and Heavy Metal Jess who's in the chat room. Like there's so many people. Like what kind of was the catalyst for the Gauntlet? Like what made you start putting together this community?
You know, it happened pretty organically. I mean, so we started in Houston back in 2013, and essentially it was just because I needed someone to play role-playing games with in Houston because I moved there from Austin, and I was not able to find a group, but I did find this basically dead G+ group called the Gauntlet, and I just started posting, like, I was like, hey, I want to play role-playing games, is anybody here? And a guy named Carrie was like, yeah, sure, I have a place at my work after hours we can play. I was like, okay, cool. So we just started kind of running games on a weekly basis, and that turned into a twice weekly, and then it turned into a 3 times weekly, and at our zenith in Houston, it was like, gosh, we had like different groups. We were running like sometimes 4 nights a week, and with like dozens and dozens of people showing up, right? So Gauntlet Houston is still really big. Like,
awesome.
It's one of the bigger face-to-face groups in the city, and then like around 2015 or so, after I moved from Houston, we started to kind of take it all online. And so, we started doing the podcast, and then the podcast gave birth to other podcasts, and that sort of, that gave birth to the Codex magazine, and we had Gauntlet Hangouts. Gauntlet Hangouts is, our online gaming is like a big, big deal. And it just kind of just grew just over the years. Like, there was no real plan in the beginning, it just sort of, I don't know, just, you get enough like-minded people together, and you can do the thing, So, it's been a really, really fun experience, actually.
What's the primary technology used for online games?
We do YouTube. Well, most of us, not everybody. Most of us, we do Hangouts, but through YouTube. So through YouTube streaming, that sets up a Hangouts call, and then that way we can play and record the games as well, right? So.
Nice.
Okay. You haven't had problems, because I've heard that there have been problems with Google Hangouts in the last 6 or 8 months. Once they announced they're getting rid of Google Plus, things started getting twitchy. Have you guys noticed that at all, or no?
No, the YouTube implementation is the same. Okay. So they've gotten rid of consumer facing hangouts.google.com, that kind of video calling. That is gone. But the YouTube implementation is identical still. It hasn't changed at all.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't think they're going to change it. There's no indication they are. So we'll keep using it as long as we can, because it's what we know and it's very easy to use, right? So that's kind of how we do it.
Awesome.
Yay.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I mean,
Go on to the... Go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, we can talk. I think the inclusivity piece is something that's really close to our hearts, and a big draw, and the thing that kind of really, not you, Abria. But what is it how was that something that you started when you started the Gauntlet Hangouts, or is that something in general, when you're talking about how it kind of happened organically, or is that something you put in place from the start, or is that something that you then saw a need for and then started to implement?
It was the latter. In the beginning, when we were essentially we were a private group for most of our history, right? I would say we've only been a really public group for maybe 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And basically, as it started to grow, we just began to realize we're hey, everybody here is white and a dude. Maybe we should try to improve upon that a little bit. And so I asked Kate Bullock. I don't know if you know Kate, but Kate is the organizer of Breakout Con, and she is very involved in different aspects of community organizing within role-playing games. I asked Kate, I was like, hey, Kate, you're very good at this. Help me come up with a plan to improve the diversity of our space, right? And so we put together what I consider to be a very kind of groundbreaking document called the Inclusivity Policy. Mm-hmm. And basically it is a document that's on our website, and it just, in very explicit, careful, detailed language, explains our community's values, what we tolerate, what we don't tolerate, what we strive for, and so we kind of put that out there, and we just started making things like safety tools, and just being very proactive about reaching out to people from marginalized groups, reaching out to women, reaching out to different queer role-playing game communities and that kind of thing, and just getting people involved, right? My Fire Twitter is part of that, right? On Twitter, you get, if you put your values out there loudly where people can see them, they're more likely to say, oh, hey, I identify with what you're doing, right? Yeah. And so the decision to be a more inclusive and diverse group, I think that was always part of our sort of and we've always been very good people, right? Kindness is our sort of overarching thing. We're very into kindness, right? And being very nice to each other. But we made a purposeful decision to try to expand the diversity of the group for sure.
Yeah, and isn't there even something on the Patreon where you can Patreon at different levels to encourage that?
Yeah, so we have this level on Patreon that is it's a $10 pledge, and basically what it is it gives you 2 memberships at a reduced price, right? So a normal full membership is $7, but the $10 one gives you 2 for 10. And the only thing is at least one of those has to be a person from a marginalized or underrepresented group. So,
Yay.
and that was actually a really nice program to sort of like, to kind of give us a little bit of like diversity boost, which was good. But I actually think that like just having that in place has been really important, right? Like, because there's only 30 of those Patreon slots, so it's not like, it's not like a huge number of people, right? But I think just like having that there on the Patreon like sends a signal, right? It lets people know they're cool. So
Yeah.
I remember seeing that and thinking like, oh yeah, this is a place I want to go hang out. Like, this is definitely
nice. Good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, and as a woman, like when I heard about that, which Mills actually is the first one who was like talking to me about the Gauntlet, and he told me about that particular piece, and I love that piece. It's like, oh, not only is it like, hey, you're tolerated or allowed here, but you're like encouraged and desired to be here, which is a huge difference. And that, I don't know, that's very important and very interesting to me. I appreciate that.
I mean, and we try to like spread that as much as we can throughout all the different pillars, fingers of the Gauntlet. I don't know. Like the Codex magazine, for example, is a really, really great example. Like, so in year 1 of Codex, not the most diverse thing in the world. It was a very, very unknown zine. We didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't have a lot of reach, and so we kind of had to, we had to kind of just like get submissions from the people who were around us, right? And so it's not super diverse. It's one of the things I don't love about the first year of Codex. It's otherwise pretty awesome. But in the second year, we made a decision to like improve that, right? So like we're okay. What do we have to do to like make sure we have more voices being represented in the zine's content, And so I don't have any like hard numbers, but the few that I remember from back then, I think we ended up at the end of volume 2 of Codex, I think we ended up with like something like 38% of all the dollars that we spent went to a woman, right?
Nice.
And so we were happy about that because it was much lower in volume 1. And now in volume 3, it's like it's basically even at this point. If I have an issue where most of the authors are men, because that's just how it's worked out, I make sure all of the artists are women, right? Like I kind of make those active decisions.
Nice.
So I try to like find that balance, and we've always been very, very good about queer representation. That's always been like a real, from the beginning. I'm a gay man, so I think that's probably part of that, right? Like we've always signaled that pretty strongly. We have a ways to go though. Like I would love to have more people of color in the Gauntlet, right? I think there are not enough people of color in role-playing games as a general matter, and I definitely would like for there to be more of the Gauntlet. So, we're always looking at like how can we try to, what do we have to do to like expand the table a little bit here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I have one tiny question if I can ask. So how do you feel like the mission of inclusivity has like directed and expanded on like the diversity of content that you guys have made and like the games that you play and the stuff that you produce? This is a softball.
Well,
explain why diversity is good.
I mean, if I understand your question correctly, I mean, I think that it has, obviously, it improves it, right? I mean, we are, in the Gauntlet, not even just for Codex, but like for everything we do, we're doing so much cool shit right now, right? Like so much cool shit. Like today, I ran a series I call True Beauty. It's Monster Hearts 2, but it's set in the 1980s ballroom scene of Harlem, right?
Oh my god.
And so, yeah, it's so good, right? And so every player character, like you must, like it's a written down thing. It's a thing we published. Every player character must be a person of color. Like it has rules for, like you must explore like what the understanding of like queer gender was back in the 80s, right? Like it has all this like stuff built into it, and like and it's still Monster Hearts, right? We're still playing Monster Hearts, but we're doing it in this like really, really cool frame. And so there's stuff like that happening all over the Gauntlet, right? I mean, it's like how do we take all this stuff we're doing and like explore different stories, tell different stories, like how do we how do we just do something that represents the bigger swathe of people out there, right? I mean, we still do our like sort of Eurocentric fantasy stuff, like that stuff is still happening in the Gauntlet, right? But we're also doing, a group of folks just finished a playtest of Orun, right? Which I think was run by Misha, but I believe Misha was at least a player though, and like that's great, right? Like there's so many opportunities in the Gauntlet to try something different, to play a character that's unlike you, and to tell different stories, right? And that happens like throughout, right? Like that's a constant thing, and it's always happening, it's always growing, and we get excited, right? We get like really excited about like your cool new angle, right? We're into it. So,
That's so good.
Yeah.
I want to play that. I have to go. Invite me.
yes, please.
I mean,
we will find a way.
I mean, I think that's the next best things. Like, how can people who are listening to this or watching us right now, how can they join the Gauntlet games?
Yeah, so it's not easy. It is. It's not. Yeah. So we have. I mean, I'll tell you. Give you some numbers here. In January, we had over 175 sessions on the calendar. Right. Mm-hmm. All of them full.
Wow.
So. Some of them will have like some drops like at the end, like last minute, because that's unavoidable. But they're all good. All the games will make, and they're all full. And that is not. We're doing our best to get more games on the calendar, right? And in fact, like the way we have to do it is we have to periodically. Basically, we just kind of periodically open the gates a little bit, right, to let new people in. And because if we took everybody who wanted to play, we don't have enough games for them, unfortunately. Right. So we have 25 spots coming open January 15th. Those are the spots that give you access to Gauntlet Hangouts. And anyone can join Gauntlet Hangouts games if there's space, but practically speaking, you have to have one of the Patreon spots because you can't otherwise RSVP in time, right? So you get like RSVP priority with one of the Patreon spots. And so we'll have 25 of those spots. We're going to do some more diversity stuff, so we'll have some of those spots available. But so it's not easy, sadly. But one thing you can do, though, is if you join at the Slack level, which is a great level to be at, that doesn't necessarily come with the Slack level doesn't automatically come with RSVP priority, but many games get organized on the Slack off books, right? Okay. And so that's a really great way of just being involved in the community. Like people are always putting like off the books games up, like we have several channels that are kind of devoted to it, and somebody will just be like, hey, on Tuesday I'm going to run this. It's too late to put it on the calendar, but who wants to play, right? And so that's one way you can kind of do it. And I think just hanging out with us is fun too. So
yeah, it honestly feels like just being at a con 24/7 forever.
That's amazing.
Oh god, it's exhausting.
It's awesome though.
Never-ending con. Yep, that's the way. That's my like. I actually wanted to call the Gauntlet that. I wanted to have the subtitle. The never-ending game convention.
Nice.
Dramatic and over the top. I went with a more subdued and ongoing conversation about role-playing games.
That does sound a bit more refined. I like that.
Yeah, a little bit more.
Yeah, and I know that Tomes, who runs our new show, Small Game Hunter, is actually like one of your big community and like community culture organizers, right?
He does, yeah. Tomes is the. We don't really have titles. Tomes is the. I call him like this. The director of like community care. Like he's the community care person, right? Community care, community resources, making sure everybody's taken care of, making sure everybody like new people know where to go to find things, and updating like various resources that are available.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I just have to give you like mad props because. Like, I organize, like, 30 people into, like, 7 games at a time. I can't even imagine.
What do you mean we're all...
I have to give credit to... so Gauntlet Hangouts is, I don't have... I used to run it, like, day to day, right? But I don't anymore. Now it's run by Lowell Francis, my co-host on the Gauntlet podcast. Okay. And Lowell is fantastic. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who, like, I get to be the face of the Gauntlet, right? Like, people associate me with the Gauntlet, right? But Lowell is that rock star person who is fucking doing the work, right?
Nice.
Like that under the radar, like getting shit done at work, right?
Yes.
Like that's awesome. Like Lowell is an amazing person, and under Lowell's guidance, Gauntlet Hangouts has like exploded. I mean, just exploded. So it's pretty awesome.
So
The division of face and labor seems to be very similar to the Happy Jacks.
So you are the Jason and I am the Lowell.
Right.
I just think of it favorite Marvel movie. You know, every great king needs an executioner. I am Stu's executioner.
Well, I will say that I want to join even more now because it's hard to get in. I'm like, oh, I'm locked out. I want it more.
Right. We're very into like increasing demand by scarcity. No.
It's working.
Yeah, the scarcity is like just because we have to. There's like no like way around it. We just, I mean, if you think about it. So, I mean, just to give you a sense of like how we've grown and how we have tried to keep up with it as best we can. The first year of Gauntlet Hangouts, the first December of Gauntlet Hangouts, which would have been December of 2015, we had something like 7 games scheduled. And last month, for December 2018, we had something like close to, it's like 160. So, yeah, like, and December, which is a tough month because of the holidays, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it has really, really grown. And we have this program called Game Facilitator Camp. And Game Facilitator Camp is an active thing that's run by Michael Barford and Lowell. And we have a brand new crop of GM/facilitators ready to come online and get their games on the calendar. So we are expanding. You know, we're very careful, right? Like we don't just let anybody run games. Like they have to either go through Game Facilitator Camp or they have to have played with us for a while to where we feel comfortable with them. And so, yeah, that's one way. If you're interested in running games, I can get you a ticket to the rodeo.
For those of you listening to the podcast, like a bunch of hands just went up in this room. Bria, Mills, myself, and Stu, we all are interested in running games.
If you are GM inclined, that is something that's easier to work with. But the demand is on the player side, obviously.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
But here's the weird thing: is I've been to a bunch of conventions where like half the games I was in were good and half weren't, but like the games I've been in Gauntlet since like August or something, and I've played in like 8 or 10 games, and none of them were bad, and I don't understand how that's possible.
What?
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's the thing he was just talking about. He has like this program to kind of like ensure quality control,
Our
GMing
culture is
program.
really strong. I mean, our culture of game running and game facilitating and our procedures and our play culture is rock solid. I mean, and it's not the kind of thing you can do overnight. It takes years to develop, but we reinforce it, right? Because we've got like people like me who are squawking on podcasts talking about our play culture, talking about how we do things, how we want to do things.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Slack where we sort of like reinforce that and give each other praise and are very kind to each other and buck each other up, right? And then you have the games, and in the games we have like standardized procedures for like setting expectations before the game. We have like feedback procedures that that we recommend. Like the play culture is super, super strong. Safety tools are huge, right? Safety tools. So that is part of that, right? Like it's and we don't just, it's not Roll20. We don't just let anybody put a game up, right? So it's a controlled thing.
Yeah.
And, some people don't understand that. They're like, oh man, like they get there and they're like, I want to run a game. And it's like, we want you to run a game, but first you need to get to know us.
Yeah.
And you need to learn our ways.
Yeah.
And then you can run a game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am going to die of
Like-
Gauntlet's thirst at this
Should
point.
like buy dinner at first, please.
I want
All right.
this so much.
I mean, we could talk about this forever, but where can they find you and the Gauntlet and give your deets?
All my deets. So our Twitter, our hot Twitter is at Gauntlet RPG. Our website is gauntlet-rpg.com. We're on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. We have a G Plus community, but G Plus is going away. Be on the lookout for the Gauntlet forums. The Gauntlet forums are replacing the G Plus community.
Yay!
Probably in the
man.
next month or two. Yep.
Cool.
The forum
Excellent.
battle. I feel that. I feel so much with that. All right. Well, we actually are a show where we answer questions and do emails.
Never heard of it.
So, so we have, I think, 2 emails tonight, right?
I believe
think
yes.
there are 3.
Three?
Well, we
might-
can push one back.
Okay, we'll see.
Yeah, the last one's real long.
Yeah.
Let's.
When railroads have no.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna read it because his audio is a little rough.
Yeah. He also he has it digitally too.
Right.
It'll be fine.
I'm trying to figure out how I would incorporate that. I would have to go in and like mute out every time
No, he
he
can
talked.
read it. I mean, like he can read it. He can look at it. Never mind.
Okay.
This audio is poison. I love it.
Where railroads have no tracks, from Mr. CJ or MRCJ.
We are seamless professionals.
Hello, everyone. Here's a half thought, a shade really, about railroady games. I'm keeping this intentionally short. Signed, MRCJ. No, I think the hosts have spoken lengthily about games where the GM coerced players into certain actions to move the game forward according to the GM's wishes. Also discussing about its opposite of the players basically doing whatever they want with no consequences. I think that there is a breakable balance. How far away do the players err before the entire game goes off the rails, as it were? Mm-hmm. If information is in A, and the players burn down in A, I'm going to make those taverns because it's clearer.
Yes.
The advice from the show has always been that the players find the information in Tavern B. On the surface, this is a good advice. Here is the balance question. If it does not matter what the players do, and they still get the information, it is basically the same as a railroad, but instead of ham-handed age 15 GM telling characters what to do, the characters do whatever they want, but the outcome is still the same. MRCJ, obligatory PS.
Nice.
Interesting.
Would you like to start, Jason?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think it depends a lot on the game, right? So like in the Gauntlet, or at least at my tables anyway, we take a very like in my games I take a very like collaborative approach, almost like a writer's room approach. So already the players are pretty involved in like at least at a basic level, like kind of describing the environment and stuff, but often like even at the sort of narrative level, right? Like we take a lot of like group ownership of the story. And so that leads like, you know, we're kind of interested in just telling the best story. And so if it makes sense for the clue to be an NB, and we all know it was originally an NA, okay, that's fine. I mean, the journey is the fun thing, right? It's not the like details, right? I think it depends on the game though. So for example, I play this game called Cthulhu Dark, which I love. It's so good. It's this very, very rules-light, Lovecraftian mystery game. And the way it works is basically you just pepper the clues wherever the players are. Okay, so if you need to find a book covered in human skin or whatever, that's an important clue, and you intended for them to find the clue in the heiress's hotel room, but they decide to go to the library instead. Well, it's in the library now, right? The way it works, and the reason why it works is because in Cthulhu Dark, what's at stake is whether your character goes insane or not, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the game, right? Like the game is not where are the clues and can we find the clues? Yeah. The game is how do we react to the horror? How do we process the horror, right? And so, yeah, whether they find the book in the library or in the hotel room is not important. What's important is once they realize it's a book covered in human skin, how do they react, right? Like that's the story, right? And so I think it depends on the game. That's my basic answer.
I have to say too, like just very quickly, I think a game where the players are inclined to burn down the tavern, you're already in sort of an adversarial relationship.
Troubled waters.
Yeah, right.
Already.
I mean, I've done some crazy. Yeah, I've also done some crazy stuff like that.
Let's not paint with such a broad brush.
We all took offense to that. Like, I am represented by that remark.
Well, also, like, Jason, you are very often my GM, and I tend to. He already started with the laughing. Like, I tend to do super crazy stuff in a very like collaborative storytelling way. See. And I mean, taverns can sometimes get burned down.
They are flammable.
They're wood.
They're full of like burnable juices.
Not necessarily for like malicious intent to burn things down, but I have characters who roll really badly a lot of the time.
Right.
Oh, that's just true. Yeah. You're the worst roller I've played with, I think.
I'm going to fix this tavern. Next thing you know, it's like an ash heap. Okay. Well, that was a hard move. I deserved that.
I'm gonna attempt to answer his question in the context of games where GMs prep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Stu.
This is what I do. If there is a clue in this place, and I've decided that really needs to be there, it makes sense story-wise.
Yeah.
Moving it is not an option. It's not going to make sense. It's not going to keep the world consistent. And they burn down Tavern A. I will have another story ready.
Yeah.
Or I will have something else going on. But they've hit a dead end on that.
Yeah.
So as far as that plot thread goes, go ahead.
Is the story not now about the people who burned down the tavern?
Exactly. I mean,
Okay, let's say they have a cryptic, and they get frustrated and break it, and the little vials of stuff evaporate the papyrus inside, rather than burning down a tavern. So, but they find another papyrus, but that one can't have it. Okay, whatever. My point is, I'm okay with players finding dead ends.
Yeah.
If they've taken actions, and it's reasonable to assume that those actions are going to result in a possible dead end, I'm going to let that happen. If the players decide, we're going to burn down a tavern. Yeah. Okay, you burn down a tavern. Burning down a tavern has repercussions.
Right.
It might involve the police. It might involve a fire inspector.
Yeah.
It may involve the destruction of an important clue as well.
Yeah.
It may involve an irate tavern keep. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
he becomes the big bad now in the story for vengeance.
But instead of saying, okay, you're going to go down, I'm going to move the clue over here, what I would normally do is say, okay, now you've got a dead end as far as what you were doing, but now there's other repercussions that have to happen. Or there's some other storyline I'm going to take you on, and this first storyline, the things that your character would normally have done to interfere with the bad guy's plots or whatever the storyline is, that's going to get a lot harder because now you don't know what's going on, or you don't have the ability to find out who was behind whatever the plot was. You see what I'm saying?
So the story
So I will go ahead.
Go, Bria.
Advocating for like a slight tweak on what Mr. CJ was talking about. I don't have a problem unless it's like a cryptic that is from 500 years ago and there's like the only possible way of getting the information. Lots of people know stuff, they just know it differently and sometimes wrong.
Oh, sure.
I don't have a problem moving the clue to Tavern B, but everyone there is rip-roaring drunk and has like a certain like outlook or perspective that changes the nature of the clue to give them like mixed intel. Maybe it's only half of the information. Sometimes it's just bad fucking intel.
Sure.
And you're just like, I know exactly where the dragon is, like right behind. So there's ways to deal with the like, all right, you done fucked up at Tavern A. So how do I get you? If it requires giving you some amount of information to move you forward down this plot that I know my group wants to go on, and maybe they just Kimmy rolled and accidentally burned down the only place in the clue. Like, find a way to
that
get
is
to
a verb.
Yeah. Sometimes you just Kimmy a roll real hard.
It's not a verb.
It's a verb. We're verbing you. You've been verbed. So I feel like there's some ways where you could give that information.
I was gonna say, can I throw in for the railroad a little bit? Like,
right.
Like, not really devil's advocate, but like, the implication of Mr. CJ's question is that like railroading is bad, and in general, I think it is. And I'm sure you all discussed this many, many times. But I do think that you have to also pay attention to how many sessions are you playing with, right? If this is an ongoing campaign, the railroad can get really frustrating and annoying, right? But if you've only got 3 or 4 sessions, maybe you don't put them on a railroad, but instead you put them in what I like to call a corridor. So the corridor still goes from one end to the other, but you can walk around the corridor. you can go into side rooms that still eventually spit you back into the corridor, right? Because I know they need to get to the end of the corridor by session 4, right? And so I think there's a way you can kind of like have a sort of end game without it feeling so railroady, right?
Yeah.
So that's slightly tangential to what he was asking, but yeah.
You can also call that a switching station, I think is what they call it in railroad parlance.
Yeah, I take issue with the idea that this person is saying, well, they burned down in A and you're just going to put the stuff in Tavern B. Like, well, you just skipped right over the fact that they burned down the tavern and there are going to be consequences for their actions.
But I mean, the burning part aside, his point is, if you move clues, let's say they just miss the clue in place A. They decide not to search it.
Well, I'm saying in my game, the clue is now irrelevant. They're now criminals.
No, but I'm saying the burning part aside, they walk into a tavern, rather than search the tavern or search the room they're trying to search to find the clue, they just say, this it can't be here, and they leave. Yeah. Moving the clue, they can do whatever they want, and the game remains the same. It is that it gets down to that sort of basic definition of railroading, which is players' decisions have no consequences.
Right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and he does kind of have a point there.
Yeah.
Burning part aside.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess the thing is, like Jason was just saying, like corridor, like depending on your state, like railroading isn't necessarily a terrible thing.
Right.
If people are still enjoying themselves, like. I mean, as a player, I get frustrated with railroads where I feel like I'm bashing my head against the wall of the corridor and I'm not finding anything and I don't have a place to go or that I don't have choice. Right. Like, the players still, technically, they still have choice when they burn down that tavern and then go to Tavern B. I mean, it's super fun, and I agree. As a GM, I would totally add different things. Maybe they're not allowed in Tavern B now because I'm sorry, you burned down the last tavern you were in. Like, I don't know.
Firebug.
Yeah, I'm not going to. You're not coming to my place. But there's interesting things you can do with things like that the players still feel like they have agency. They still feel like they're making choices, and they do because they made the agency point to burn down the tavern. So they definitely have these things that do still impact the story, but there's not like the frustration.
Well, and I would also say you don't have to tell the players that the clue was originally in A.
Thank you.
Right? Like, I mean, they don't know that, and like they're still having fun, and they're so is there a bit of like, is it kind of deceptive? I guess, but I think it also just depends on your philosophy of role playing games, right? Like, I'm way more interested in telling the best story in the amount of time that I've got, and sometimes that means kind of fudging things a little bit. And again, I feel better about that, especially when there are other stakes at play. So, like in my example I said earlier, what's at stake is the character's sanity in that game. It's not whether they get to the end or not, right? And so that's the game, right? And so I think it depends a lot on the game. It depends on a lot of the circumstances, really. But
yeah, I mean, as the GM, you kind of have to ask, like, what will make the most interesting story? Like, maybe throwing some wrenches in them finding that clue will make the story more interesting and better. Mm-hmm. In which case, you burned down the tavern. Oh, man.
That's too bad.
The cipher was in there. What are you going to do now? You're going to have to go talk to a bunch of people and, like,
there's that
bribe
too,
someone?
right? Yeah, you can tell them, you screwed up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the smoking remains of the thing that they needed.
So sometimes that's the more interesting, more fun story because that opens up a whole bunch of avenues. But sometimes, like, I mean, especially, like, when I'm running con games, like Jason said, when you have a time crunch and you've got, sometimes, like, okay, running around this village is not the most interesting part of the story. Oh, look, you tripped and, there's another copy of the cipher on the ground. Good job. All right, let's go to the more fun part. Like
right.
Obviously don't do it that badly. That's a terrible way to do it. But you have to decide as a GM. It's like, all right, what is going to be the best, most fun story for me and my players?
I mean, it's kind of... that's similar to sort of the philosophy that Gumshoe has, which is finding the clue is not the problem. The problem is once you have the clues, piecing them all together and figuring out what's going on, right? So in that game, you just get the clue. I mean, if you're someplace and there's a clue, here's the clue.
Yeah.
There's no roll or anything. You have it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a different philosophy of gaming, and I think there's probably different players that prefer different sorts of that. But I do think he kind of has a point when the players' choices start to become irrelevant to the progress of the story.
Yeah, player choices should absolutely matter.
Yeah.
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 But
Especially arson.
yeah, but I feel like maybe that's a sign that your players are telling you that the kind of game that you set out to like run isn't necessarily the one they want to play, and maybe they didn't know better at the beginning. They're like, oh yeah, we've only ever known like Dungeons and Dragons, where the DM prepares a fuck ton and then
Right.
walks them down the story, and they're like, nah, we want to explore the moral repercussions of killing everyone in this town. You're like,
Right.
okay, well let's like take their lead a little bit, follow, and see if they make any concerted effort. Like, okay, I know we burned down the place with the one clue. Let's see if we can find another version of the clue that tells you like, oh, they still want to get back on track. But if they're having more fun exploring, like, what does it feel like to murder in a world where I'm a god? Like, play that game with them and like, listen and respond.
And watch your back.
Yeah, and your players are crazy. Run.
Right.
I would not love it.
All right. Thank you, MRCJ or Mr. CJ, for the email.
Yes.
The next email from yet another Jason.
Not either of us.
GMing horror story / venting.
You want to read
Oh,
this?
sure, I'll read it. Yay.
Yeah.
Alright, well, I did it again. I deviated from my group's usual dungeon crawl to run something different. This time it was the Fall of Delta Green, the Gumshoe System spin-off of the Call of Cthulhu spin-off. Oop,
Yes.
That hurt my brain. Vietnam setting, Cthulhu mythos, what could go wrong? I had a player who couldn't quite grasp the system mechanics and didn't raise his hand for a better explanation until 90 minutes into it.
Oh yeah, that's good timing.
It's fucking me, though. So I give him a behind-the-screen explanation of how the mechanics have worked so far, breaking down how rolls and points spends play out. That helped, but he still didn't quite get it. He would question rolls and point spends I called for. He was never argumentative, but I could tell he was a little frustrated. It boiled down to me basically saying, we have 4 hours to get through. Uh-oh, I wasn't ready. This one shot, just trust me. And it was fine. The session played out great. The investigation had great RP. They encountered weird mythos stuff and constructed their own ritual to solve the problem, complete with a human sacrifice and chanting. Classic Cthulhu. But after the session, the feedback wasn't so positive. The player who never quite understood the mechanics still didn't get it, and he wanted more dungeon crawl, dice rolling conflict. Another player piped up to say, yeah, our characters had guns and I was waiting to use them. A third player said, I missed all the maps we usually play through, meaning the dungeon maps I use for our usual game. So, fine, not a big deal. The system didn't play well with my group. They still had fun, but... Wait a minute! Fuck that! Fuck what the players think! This is also me. Cool. I waited 6 months to run this game. I spent hours prepping it. I filled out the pre-gen character sheets and mailed them physically, with a stamp and everything, to my players. We play online. I made a 60s music playlist. I crammed a full investigation successfully into 4 hours and even let them jump the rails to create their own mythos ritual to enchant an item with an old one's power. You don't understand the system? Maybe read the book like I did. Or simply ask me to explain the character sheet you had for 2 months before the game. Or even reply to my pregame email I sent several days. Sorry, I'm just cracking up because this is very good. Before the session. You also sat there watching the other 3 players play the game perfectly for 90 minutes before saying anything. You want to use your weapons? You want dungeon maps? Fine, murder hobos. Fine. I'm sorry you didn't have to talk your experience points this time. Fuck, excuse me for bringing something different to the table. Next time, you'll get your fucking dungeon crawl.
So angry.
He's
So angry. The venting.
Right? This feels very good to, like, read secondhand.
I missed the question.
Yeah. It's just a
Oh, this
story
is
about
just
why
his
he's mad.
venting.
Yeah, I think it's a horror story.
A horror story.
Oh, and don't worry about me. I'll just be looking longingly through the game store window at all the shiny new systems that I'll never get to play because you won't appreciate them. And God forbid you actually run a game for me.
Real
Aw.
feels.
Thanks for playing. Thanks for listening, Jackers. Keep jacking. Like, I felt that anger by the end, and I was like, yeah, fuck me. What are we talking
No,
about?
wait.
Yeah.
You need to lower your expectations on for your players.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone. You can't read a rule book. Come on,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's unheard of.
Also, I'm a little confused that they play online, but you physically mailed the character sheets.
I think I think he's saying he did that as part of the setting because like that's like
Oh,
part
like
of
it
his
was a
setup.
cool letter
Yeah.
A
thing?
cool
Okay,
letter
okay.
for his players to get.
I dig it.
Manila envelope.
I dig
Yeah,
it. All
because
right.
it was set in like the 60s. He made a 60s music playlist to go with it, so it was kind of like their way of setting up the ambiance of it,
Yeah.
which is super cool and creative. I really like that, and I don't even know if I could find a stamp if I needed one nowadays, but cool. I feel you, but I also am like, hey, like the anger. I felt the anger of that, but like I don't know. I feel like there's like some miscommunication here between you and the players, and it is amazing that you want to run all these systems and play in all these systems. And since you obviously have capability for like online gaming, maybe you should check out the Gauntlet.
Yes, so I want to jump in here
Yeah.
because I don't know if it's like lowering your expectations of the players, but rather why don't you set the expectations properly for your
Don't take what I'm going
players,
to
right?
say.
So I'll tell you how we do it. We have a system called CATS. It's an acronym. It's concept, aim, tone, and subject matter. It's really fast. You do it like 5 to 10 minutes before you start playing. And you can also kind of be working on it beforehand too. But the idea is that at a basic level, we're going to understand the concept of this game. The aim, we're going to talk about what this game intends to do and how we do it. And even further, what we're going to do this session. So if we're just doing character creation and maybe 1 or 2 scenes, I'm going to tell you that. The tone, so everyone understands the tone and doesn't go burn down in A when that is out of bounds. And then the subject matter, so that everyone is aware that, hey, there could be a book with human skin, or hey, there could be some like other gross shit, so you need to be aware of that. And also, hey, let's talk about safety tools. I mean, I think that like that's a very like formalized way of doing it, but I think I think the problem that that Jason may have had here is that he did not make sure his players didn't even like understand like what their responsibilities were, right? And like what was going to happen. So I think there was definitely like a breakdown of communication there. It sounds like so. Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like for the most part, like it was pretty successful. And I mean, it can also just be a thing of like, hey, they played this and they're like, they tried it out and hey, I missed the maps. Like you can definitely also have players like if this is their first time running through this game, like I've done that too, where I've sat down and played a game and done the whole thing, and then I've kind of like, all right, I don't really like this system. Like it doesn't speak to me. Like, great, you did a great job running it.
Or it's not D&D. I want to play D&D. There's a huge number of those people.
Yeah, and if that's your flavor that you love, that's fine. And that's kind of what it sounds like to me. Is that like he really wanted to try. He really wants to be a polysystemist. I don't know how you say that, but and try all these different systems while he's got a group who's like, no, we really like and are comfortable with D&D, and that's what we want to play. Which is great if that's if that's what you want to do. But it sounds like maybe you should start looking for other people to play with online who are more interested in other systems. And it doesn't mean you have to drop this group. Like, play D&D with these people. It's it seems like it's been working for a long time. But
I don't know. He doesn't sound very happy.
Well,
he doesn't sound happy with them in this particular instance.
I think it's time for a breakup.
Yeah.
Time for a group breakup. Or a break, at least.
I don't think it's necessarily about break. Like, it seems like he was just really excited for this thing. And the story he wanted to tell actually probably shouldn't have happened in the one-shot. If you're introducing a new system, like, give your players a chance to get comfortable in it. Like, do a character gen with, like, 2 scenes, so you're like, okay, how do I walk across the street? And you play through those, like, bitty things. It looks like, with all the things that he sent off and creating all, like, I think he wanted a campaign of this. And then putting all his expectations in a 4-hour one-shot, like, he didn't get what he wanted from this. They didn't get what they wanted from this. It was just
too much pressure and such high expectations on not like I don't know.
Right, they were going to try something a little different.
Yeah.
You gotta ease into
and it wasn't what people were expecting.
Gotta talk.
And you don't spring it on them.
Use lots of lube. You gotta use lots of lube and make sure everything goes smoothly.
Right.
wait, what are we talking about?
Constant communication. Please keep checking in.
Yes.
I'm talking about butt sex now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's
By the
go.
way, the word you were looking for earlier, Kimmy, is polygamorous.
There you
Yeah. That's it.
go. I love it.
Let's go ahead and
Polygamous.
read the last email because we still have
Nice.
we got about 10 minutes.
Okay, excellent. I will. Do you want to read it? I will read it.
We could split it if you
We
want.
will pass off. All right.
Sentence by sentence.
I will pass off, and I will start, and then you pick up.
Are we doing Swedish accents?
No,
No.
I don't have a Swedish accent. I've got a bad Irish accent and
Hello,
a fairly good
douchebags.
Russian accent, and I sound
Johan from Sweden
very-
here again. Go ahead.
Nope.
In episode 2307, you were talking about continuing games past their logical end, a sin I, as well, have committed. The discussion went on to talk about rebooting a campaign a long time later, which leads to my counterexample, where we ran new campaigns starting immediately after the first one ended. So consider what follows a success story.
Hey.
Ooh, we don't usually get this. A long time ago, before even your podcast was on the air.
Wait, is that a real thing?
Yeah. I mean, we're coming up on 10 years in
100
August.
years ago.
Yes. Years
advent of
ago.
dice.
Also, like Loki, Jason from the Gauntlet is like an old school listener, so. All right. Before we were even on the air, pre-2009.
Yeah.
As a much less experienced GM, I was running a new hot game called Vampire the Requiem. I was trying to get out of a failed sandbox campaign streak. Hint, put toys in the sandbox or fish.
Gross. Gross.
So I...
Or almond roca.
That's a callback to other emails and other shows. So.
Almond Roca, for sure.
That's very good.
So I set up a rather linear campaign, which for that group worked quite well. That concluded with an old order overthrown in the city without a prince and a whole lot of burning buildings. Players that did not pass unnoticed among the mortals. As the rebel who killed the prince fell to the hand of the players, we concluded the campaign, and my friend took over GMing. He then ran a Mortals campaign where we, the next city over, were affected by the newly declared martial law due to, quote, terrorist attacks. You know, the players. We ran that as a mystery game and concluded once we realized that we were dealing with vampires and all skipped town.
That's good.
At that point, GMing switched back to me, and I started the campaign back on the original city with new characters just as the Mortals campaign ended, so like a month or so in-game later. The old characters were not present and probably skipped town in the resulting power struggle. Ready? Go. High five.
If you don't tag out, the referee
Yeah.
can call
Yeah,
you.
right.
That's true.
Now, as the prince was a rather mad primogen, the old characters had helped escape, and as the game started, the country was under martial law and lockdown. Think regular military checkpoints between blocks. This continued and morphed into the story of the fall of one of the player characters.
Nice.
He started out intending to be a cult leader. Okay, that's a good goal.
So Samantha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other players started a bar. But
Oh my god, it's our game!
yeah, this is good. But ended up on the prince's bad side, and over the course of the campaign, single-handedly managed to diablerize the sheriff, destabilize the prince's position till he fled town, and then pursuing him and sacrificing him as well.
Sacrifice.
At that point, he was rather over the edge and tried to off the new prince as well. Who had been helped to power by our bar starting player, now Seneschal, by firing an anti-tank rocket into the foyer of her haven. That upset the military police standing at a checkpoint 100 yards away, and the campaign climaxed with the rest of the players. That's a good to climax together.
Yes.
Pursuing him to try to stop him, and him pursuing the diablerized sheriff's sister, who had chosen that moment to strike at him. His final moment was to try firing an anti-tank grenade at that sister in melee range and botching it.
Jesus.
That was ruled as the shell landed harmlessly at both their feet. His next action was to jump on the shell to try to set it off, which I allowed, resulting in his final death. We ended the campaign there, which everyone seemed to like. Yeah, I think your player has definitely bought into the character death
Yes.
at that point. I guess I somewhere in there lost track of what I was trying to prove. But I guess that the moral of the story is that continuing with a campaign right where the action left off is not as bad an idea as you made it out to be. I believe the key is to select a new angle for the new campaign's conflict and not continuing with the struggle of faction good versus faction bad, optional changing sides. P.S. Roll for next year's fortune. I don't know how to do that. PPS, do not use Stork's dice for that roll.
Yes,
Copy that.
accurate.
PPPS, stay awesome, douchebags.
Yeah.
Aw, thank y'all.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I think that there's a lot of changing up there because, like, they switched from their original campaign, then they switched to a new GM and totally new characters. And then they switched back to the original GM and the original location, but still again with all new characters.
Yeah,
Right.
But that's not necessarily. I mean, that's a shared world,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is fun. But that's not really picking up the same campaign.
Right.
Yeah.
At least to me, it doesn't feel the
Yeah,
same.
same.
Cool.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Have you ever done that, Jason, with like longer form campaigns?
This is, I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, this is not, I haven't gamed like this in a long time. This is like, this sort of like long-term campaign kind of gaming is not something I do much of. Although, the way we do it in the Gauntlet, and I have done this, particularly like with our very popular AP, Mercy Falls, most stars, plug. I have done what is essentially like an anthology world, right? I've done that, which I think is kind of what this listener basically ended up with, right? Like we have the same persistent world, but basically every 4 to 5 weeks we shuffle the players up a little bit, and we have like new characters in that same world, and there are like threads that connect all the different like we call them the series. The series is like 4 to 5 sessions in the Gauntlet. That's a series. All the little series that connect up into the campaign, they have like some common threads that connect them, and because we record all our games, you can go like watch and learn all that stuff if you want to, right? And so like it is a long-term thing. It is a persistent campaign world, but it's essentially anthology or kind of episodic, right? And I think that actually helps you avoid. It really helps you avoid like burnout. It helps you avoid like we've all been in campaigns where it's just done, right?
Yep.
Yes.
It's just done, but we're still playing it, and because we feel like it's our civic duty to do it or something, right? Like we've all been there. So I think what this GM landed on is essentially what we do, right? But like ours is just much more like formally that, right? But no, so I definitely I don't game in that like kind of same group, 30 sessions, mode. I haven't done that in a long time.
Isn't there like a comic book setting coming up too?
There is, yeah. Rich
Super
Rogers,
pumped about
Wolf. Yeah, Rich Rogers, Wolf Francis, and I think a couple of other people too. They're doing Jim Crocker, maybe. They're doing a world called Gauntlet Comics, which is a bit of a spin-off. Rich had this world called Gauntlet City, and he played like a bunch of different systems in this same city called Gauntlet City, right? And the aim of that campaign was to try out different small, lesser-known games, right? And so they maintained this like neighborhood map and all this like neighborhood information, but they played all these different games. And Gauntlet Comics, I think, is a springboard off that. Like it's a superhero version of that, right?
Nice.
So that's how we do long-term campaigns in the Gauntlet. I've done my Mercy Falls Monster Hearts campaign, which is which a lot of people are really do. My We Hunt the Keepers Dungeon World campaign world, which is another kind of fun thing. So yeah, but it's always like this kind of anthology kind of style.
Awesome.
Nice.
Cool.
Yay.
All right. Success.
Yeah.
We did it.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
much.
Oh gosh, thanks for having me. I was delighted and honored to be asked on.
Yeah, very excited. Well, hopefully you can join us again, and thank you for all your patience and all your
Without an
insight.
hour's worth of prep before we
Oh
actually
my
get to
gosh.
speak.
About the tech problems, yeah.
No worries.
So, but yeah, and one more time for the back row, where can people find you?
We're on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. Our website is gauntlet-rpg.com, and we're on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet.
Yay!
Nice.
Awesome.
And keep that Twitter fucking spicy. 'Cause
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. There are people who want me to like tone it down.
Never.
No. I
Do
love
not.
my hot Twitter.
I need it.
We're
All
not
right.
the table for
All
tone
right.
Twitter.
Nope.
Tone on Twitter.
All right, I'm going to end it.
All right,
Okay.
okay. Bye.
Bye.
All right, hold on one second. Wait. No, wait. There's like things.
Thank you for joining us for season 23, episode 13 of Happy Jack's RPG podcast.
Sure.
My name is Stu.
My name is Kimmy.
Mills.
And a Bria.
And
Yay!
That's Jason. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time, and we'll leave with the song. Goodbye. I'm going to mute the mics.
Beatrice, so exalted.
sing the pure mountain air. Heads erect, eyes to front, stepping proudly together. Sure freedom sits throned on each proud spirit there. Down the hill twining, their blessed steel shining, like rivers of beauty that flow from each burn. From mountain and valley, 'tis liberty's rally. Out and make way for the bold Fenian men. Our prayers and our tears they have scoffed and derided. They've shut out God's sunlight from spirit and mind. Our foes were united and we were divided. We met and they scattered our ranks to the wind. But once more returning within our veins burning, the fires that illumined our Carlow Glen raised the old cry anew, slogans of God and you. Out and make way for the bold Fenian men. We men from the north, from the Suir and the Shannon, let tyrants come forth, we'll bring force against force. Our pen is the sword and our voice is the cannon. Rifle for rifle and horse against horse. We've made the Pro-Saxon yield many a red battlefield. With God on our side, we will triumph again. Pay them back woe for woe, give them back blow for blow. Out and make way for the bold Fenian men. By side for the cause have our forefathers battled, when our hills never echoed the tread of the slave. In many a field where the lead and hail rattled, through the red gap of glory they marched to the grave. And those who inherit their name and their spirit will march neath the banners of liberty then. All who love foreign law, native or Sassanah, must out and make way for the bold Fenian men. And those who inherit their name and their spirit will march neath the banners of liberty then. All who love foreign law, native or Sassanah, must out and make way for the bold Fenian men.
The preceding program has been a presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.
Bum, 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 bum.